If you sell to a DSO, you're likely to get scammed.
There's sometimes when people say things like, say no to the DSO. To me, I feel like that is a very ignorant statement. And I say that with authority and strength because I know both sides. And I will tell you this, if you have seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. There are so many opportunities where a private practice dentist sells to some person coming out of school, or there was an associate that's getting their first practice. And it's a nightmare. You get your $3 million practice and you're like, I want to sell to anybody but a DSO. Okay, good luck. How are you going to find somebody who is willing to pay that much money for your practice? And you want to leave your practice tomorrow? Very difficult.
Welcome back to another episode of Dental Marketing Theory. I'm your host, Gary Bird. I'm the owner of SMC National, where we help offices just like yours level the playing field against the big guys out there so you can grow the way that you want. But some people, at the end of their career, decide to sell their practice. And when they do, it's really important that you understand how to do that. And so today, I have a guest that actually helps dentists sell their practice someday. Elijah Desmond, if you don't know him, you live under the rock. He's the co-founder and co-CEO of Dental Pitch Brokerage, and he's going to discuss the upside, the downside of selling to different kinds of people, DSOs versus groups versus independents, and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck when you go to sell your practice. This was a really informative episode, and I learned a lot from it. So you're going to want to stay tuned for this one. All right, we are live for another episode, and today we have someone famous in the dental industry. I actually just tagged him in a video recently and was talking about if you want to get in front of dentists and dentists to know you, this is a good guy to know. But he's doing something new that I'm excited to talk about. And Elijah, we just spent a couple seconds talking about this right before. And I was recently watching a podcast, and it was Say No to DSOs. And you said, I haven't listened to the podcast, but I've heard about it. And the show went something like this. Okay, so if you sell to a DSO, you're likely to get scammed because they're going to offer you a boatload of money, a truckload, more than everybody else. But you only get a little bit of cash in hand, less than if you sold privately. And then you're only going to get, and I hope I'm representing their side correctly, right? And I think I am, but if not, I would love to hear from the audience on that. So then you're going to have to stay in work for a while, and you're going to be shackled, was the word that they used, to the practice for some time. And then you're going to get shares in the company that make up this massive amount of money, which are just made up make-believe numbers of shares, and they get diluted over time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was I listened into this and I'm like, man, this is good, but I don't know the other side of the story. So help me make sense of this.
Yes. So first off, thank you for having me. Super, super excited to be here and to educate. I want to give a extreme disclaimer. First off, this could be like, you ever see the boxing glove preview matches? Like, we could have a boxing glove of say no to DSOs and me or this podcast, and we're going to go back and forth.
I would love to do that, by the way. So let's give your side of the story. I'm going to drop this, and I hope they see it, and then let's have a conversation, because I literally am ignorant of this topic, and I don't have a pony in the race. So
yes, absolutely. And I also, here's the disclosure. I stand for private practice dentists and private practice dentistry. I also stand with small groups, emerging groups, mid-sized groups.
Which is different, right, than big DSOs. Like, those are all different categories. There's a lot of different categories now.
And emerging groups and private equity. I stand with the industry at large. So I have zero interest on either side. I just am only going to come with the facts. And there's sometimes when people say things like, say no to the DSO, to me, I feel like that is a very ignorant statement. And I say that with authority and strength because I know both sides. And I will tell you this, if you have seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. If you didn't catch that, it's not, if you've seen them one, you've seen them all. It does not work like that. We work with over 55 different types of buyers, 55 different buyers rather. And many of them have so many different structures, then it's not even funny. It's crazy. Some are dentist driven. Some give money up front, little, with an earn out. Some allow you to take shares in the company. Some you are actually keeping shares of your own dental practice. And there's just so many different variations of percentages. If you have seen one DSO, you have seen one DSO. And so I completely disagree a statement like putting blanket statements that DSOs are all bad. They're actually not.
Okay, and I agree with you. I agree that it's not possible for all DSOs to be bad, right? But that also, that's not saying that story that I just told is false either, because that's probably happened before. But there's probably been people burnt selling to a single practice. So how do I, as somebody like me, let's pretend I'm a dentist and I'm completely ignorant of this process, which I am. I'm not a dentist, but I am ignorant of this process. How do I protect myself and get the best of all worlds?
Yeah, well, number one, you hire an expert. So I own Dental Pitch Brokerage, okay? Myself and my colleagues are experts at this. And we have relationships with just over 55 buyers. So number one, you don't go in by yourself. You go in with a security guard or 10, right? And then number two, you say what you want in advance, right? If you say, I want my full practice purchase, I don't want to have any rollover equity. Okay. Well, now you have eliminated we'll call it, I'm gonna say 25% of the opportunities. Now you're down to 75% of the opportunities. Then if you say, I want to have as much as my money as I can up front. Matter of fact, I need to have 80%. Okay. You have now eliminated another 25%. Somewhat, I don't want quoted on it, but from my knowledge, they're reasonable. They're not unreasonable percentages. Yeah, so it's not like published by ADSO or something like that. Yep, yes, I can say that. I'm pretty confident behind those facts. So then you say, outside of that, you're like, okay, I want an opportunity where I can actually maintain 30% of my practice. I just want a growth partner. I want a JV partner, right? So now you're like 25% left. So it's like all you have is 25%, right? And so then in each of those buckets, there's different variations of each type. And so I say all of that to say that there are so many different types of opportunities. And if you know what you want up front, it really can save you down the road, down the long haul. I also would say this. There are so many opportunities where a private practice dentist sells to some person coming out of school, or that was an associate that's getting their first practice. And it's a nightmare. It is a complete nightmare. And they don't know how to run a business, and they run their business into the ground, and they have terrible leadership skills. I mean, there's so many things. So it's all about finding the right partner in general and knowing exactly what you want. And also there's a lot of practices that build up to, let's just call it a practice that's a $2 million or $2.5, $3 million practice. And they're like, all right. And I actually seen this in a Facebook group recently. You get your $3 million practice and you're like, I want to sell to anybody but a DSO. Okay, good luck. How are you going to find somebody who is willing to pay that much money for your practice? And you want to leave your practice tomorrow? Very difficult. So one of the biggest mistakes I see,
if it comes just to like cash buyers, right? And we're not talking about equity rolling over. We're just talking about cash. And then you stay there for a couple years, right? Just to transition the thing. DSOs are largely going to pay more than private practices in that instance.
Yes. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not just going to say yes. I'm going to give you the reason. I'll give you the exact reason why they can pay more. Okay. Let's just say a practice is worth $3 million. Okay. And say they're $3 million in collections. Okay. And not to get anybody confused or break it down, but let's just say $3 million in collections, 10% margin on that is $300,000. 20% margin is $600,000. Okay. So you have $600,000 in net profit or EBITDA. And the multiple on that means you multiply it about 5. So you're back to a $3 million sale, but you had a multiple of 5 times that $600,000 in net profit to get you there. So a private practice dentist is going to offer you somewhere between, let's just say, 80% and 120% of collections. Okay. So say they offered you $3 million. If they had $3 million, chances are it's very low that they're going to have $3 million. It's their first practice, or they're coming out of college, or their associate. $3 million is a tough, big, huge amount to get. All right. Now, why can a small DSO private equity offer you more? I want to educate the audience on arbitrage. It's a very straightforward concept of why they can offer more. Arbitrage is this. You have let's just call it a small DSO with 80 locations, okay? And they're acquiring the practice. Say they acquire the practice and it's at a 5 times multiple. That's 500,000, or say 600,000 times 5 is 3 million. Okay, so they're offering $3 million and they acquired you at a 5 times multiple. 6 times 5 is 3 million. 600,000 times 5 is 3 million. All right, next. When they acquire you, as soon as they acquire you, since they acquired you into a large group of 80 practices, their multiple is significantly higher than a 5 times multiple. It actually could be a 10 or more multiple. So as soon as they purchase your practice, that was $3 million, as soon as they bring you into their group, that same practice with 0 changes is not worth $3 million because it's a 10 times multiple. It is now worth $6 million. They made $3 million just from acquiring the practice. So they have the ability to pay a little bit more.
It's paper $3 million, right? It's kind of like when you buy a house. I bought a house one time for, I'm just going to make up numbers, $1 million. And then it went up to $2 million. But if I just live in that house, it's just paper. It's a paper value. I don't actually have that money. Is that accurate?
That's correct for the person who bought it. So they paid $3 million, but they now have an additional $3 million. What are they going to do with it?
Yeah, they're going to borrow against it, just like I could borrow against my house, take that money, and now I'm going to leverage the debt against that. Now, why? Is it just purely because they have more practices that they're able to do this and that multiple is higher? Or is it a function of what they added to the business?
The amount of practices is very irrelevant. It is the EBITDA. So the EBITDA that they started with was 600,000. And now they are part of a group that, let's just say, that has 100 million in EBITDA, or 10, even I'm gonna say 10 million. 10 million is an easy number. 10 million of EBITDA. 600,000 of EBITDA is going to get you a 5 times multiple, possibly 6. Say 5 times multiple. EBITDA of 10 million is going to get you more so around a 10 times, maybe 11 times multiple. Now, newsflash, there are groups out there that have a way bigger EBITDA than 10 million. It could be 50 million. I mean, you talk about Heartland, you talk about Aspen, you talk about DC, you talk about these huge groups, MB2. They're trading at like a 15 or more, 17. So now your $3 million practice is now worth $9 million. They made $6 million. So do you think that they can offer you more money? Answer is yes. The answer is yes. And to your point, and even to the why not DSO, whatever the podcast is, they're like, well, they're not going to give you that $3 million all up front. You're right. And we could talk about that if you want.
Okay. So yeah, you're not going to get the full $3 million up front. They're going to pay you out. The argument, and again, I may have misunderstood it because this is not my arena, but the argument was they're going to offer you more money than the next guy, but you're not going to get all that money. And you're going to only get some of the money, and then it's going to be paid out over salary as you work, as you transition it, and they want you to stay there as long as possible. And then they're going to give you shares, which the shares are just like make-believe money. They said you could, and I remember this part very well. They said you can put whatever number you want on the value of the shares because it's not a publicly traded company. And then also those shares are going to be diluted over time with debt and things like that.
Yep. So let's eat that all up. To start, you said you're not going to be getting all of your money up front. Okay. That is a very accurate statement 95% of the time. Okay. Let me explain. What if say you get 80% of your money up front? So if you were to get $1 million practice sale, you would get $800,000. The $200,000, here's how that, if it's a 100% buyout, okay, the $200,000 that's left, they're going to ask you to stay for a minimum of 3 years. And it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 2, but say 3 years. In those 3 years, you will get the remainder of your $200,000, okay? And it is paid on top of your salary or your income, your pay, right? You have your regular pay, and then you'll have, say, quarterly distributions. And that $200 can be paid out in quarterly distributions. It could be paid annually, but you're going to be paid out over time. Now, what's super important to understand is that the reason for the earnout is just so the production doesn't drop. So let's just say you're producing, so you don't check out. So let's just say you're producing $1 million a year. They don't need you necessarily to go to 1.5, 1.2. They're going to most of them are not going to make you increase your production. Okay. What's going to happen is they just want you to maintain where you're at, which is another reason why dentists shouldn't go and try to ramp their production right before they sell, because you got to keep up with that pace. Right? You got to keep up with that pace. So super important to understand what it is. It's called an earnout is the term, and that earnout is paid over a certain amount of time agreed. Typically, a group practice is going to want you to stay for, I'm going to call it 3 to 5 plus years, as long as you want. The longer, the better. But that is the magic number, is 3 to 5. And I'm seeing that pretty consistent. Now, there are situations where it is okay. Like in Florida, I have a specific buyer that is totally okay with paying you top dollar. Matter of fact, they will pay you 80% to 100%, could be a little bit more, of your collections. And they're okay if you want to go. If you want to go, that's fine. That's rare. That's a unicorn. That's one of my Florida buyers, right? That is not typically the case, but that just goes to show.
Is that because Florida has stricter rules about moving in there, so it's harder, or what? Why?
The state of Florida just recently granted reciprocity to the whole country, I believe. So a dentist could go and take their jurisprudence exam essentially in another state and move to Florida. So there's a shortage, and we need dentists down here in Florida, and we're nationwide. We work with practices nationwide, but I happen to live in Florida to know that. Yep. You talked about getting shares diluted. It's important to understand that piece as well. So has there been instances where a group or a DSO has bought a practice and then that DSO tanked and went under? Yes, businesses fail. It does happen. However, the chances of a dental practice failing are very slim, which is why dentistry is like one of the top industries that private equity is investing their money in, because it has a very low fail rate. However, understand that if you do invest in a DSO, you're taking a chance. It is possible for them to fail. This is the reason why it makes sense to do the research on them. How long have they been around? How well are they doing, et cetera?
Let me give you a different angle of this, because this is how they explained it. They said what is actually happening, and this is on their podcast, this is a public thing, right? So they said DSOs are diluting the shares on purpose, right? Which happens. This happens in corporate America across the board, not just in dental. So they said they tell you're getting X amount of shares, you're getting, $3 million in shares. And then over time, that value is actually shrinking because they're diluting it. They're making more shares. So it's shrinking. Your value shrinking over the long haul. And then the reason that you don't hear about people complaining about it is because DSOs have very strong, what's the clause when you can't go out and like say negative things about people? I've done whole podcasts on it before, where you can't go out and talk bad about the person that you're a non-disparagement clause. And so and then there's like that, or like the people are like ashamed, they don't want to talk about later, like they got burnt and things like that. That was the angle that they presented it from.
Yes. So does that exist? Absolutely. It absolutely does exist. Is that rule? If you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO.
So going back to your initial point, you need an expert. You need somebody to help you, because this can and will happen, not just in dentistry, but in any business. If I went to sell my business or you went to sell your business, like it could happen to us if we don't know what we're doing.
Yes. Let me give you an example. I can share a personal example. A business, not a business that I own now, but a business that I had owned prior. Okay. I had about 7 investors. And those 7 investors, they had shares of my company ultimately. And I seen the company had a huge opportunity to join forces with 3 other companies or individuals. And what did I do to bring them in? I diluted everyone's share by 75%. including my own, everyone's, to bring in those 3 other individuals. When those 3 other individuals came in, we grew the company by 1,000+%. And so those shares were actually worth way more with them in. So diluting shares to a company is very normal in business. This is normal. I mean, I believe it's happened with some of the top stocks in in America. So that is normal, and there are horror stories. And I think that if we focus only on the bad things, you can have an entire podcast around it. But I think it's also not fair to share a one-sided message across the whole industry, because it is not one-sided, and I'll go toe to toe with that specific group.
Here's the thing, Elijah. It's like it's not like this was a one podcast. This is the name of their podcast, is Say No to DSOs About Selling. And so when you came on today, I was like, man, I want to learn about this. And I know the devil's always in the details, right? Like it's always that way. It's never just cut and dry. So there are good opportunities out there. There are opportunities you might get burnt out there too, is what I'm hearing from you, right? Like across the board.
Yes, and let me explain this as well. Let me give an example of a good opportunity. So let's just say you sell your practice, and your practice is valued at $1 million. Okay, so you sell your practice and you only sell 60% of your practice. Okay, so you get $600,000 cash, put it in your pocket. The 40% you rolled, meaning you kept that 40% ownership. You own nothing of the holding company that bought the 60%, but you're now a part of it. And 3 years down the line, and by the way, you sold at let's just call it a 5 times multiple. Okay. 3 years or 4 years down the line, what happens is that company does something called a recap. Okay. And then you have the ability to get 20% or even 40% of your shares, call it 20%, bought up from you. Okay. That 60% that you already sold, that's being recapped, that's being bought. And now 20 more percent of your 40 can be bought as well. Here's the difference. Since you were part of that big roll up, it's 20%, not times the 5 multiple, but now it's times 13. Okay. So your $200,000 is now worth more like 500,000 plus, right? Because you sold 20% and you hold on to the next 20. So that is a JV model. Okay. And you don't take ownership in the holding company. You keep what you got. So that's just another example of how different groups, and there's a lot to talk about. But at the end of the day, I think it's important people hear both sides, because there's amazing winning stories from the private practice side and the DSO side. But spreading the word, because somebody got burned and then wanted to personally started a podcast about it and just take revenge on all DSOs is not right. That's like somebody doing that for private practices. It's just not right. One cop, if there's one bad cop, doesn't mean they're all bad cops.
I'm totally with you, man. All right. So this is really good. You helped me understand some of the nuances. I'm definitely going to continue to dig into this. And if I had questions about this, you know who I'd come to? I'd come to you first and say, okay, help me understand this. I got my practice. This is what I'm thinking. How am I going to, and everybody wants the most money possible. Right. And I think that's why people get stuck in these traps sometimes, is like, everybody wants to maximize everything, but there's upsides, there's pros and cons to different sides of it. So if someone does have a question for you and they want to learn more about this, how can they reach out to you, and how does that work? Like, do I come to you and I don't pay you, right? You only make money if you help me sell my practice, right?
Yep. I could quickly tell you, I'll quickly tell you our process, but I'll tell you how to reach out. First off, Elijah@dentalpitchbrokerage.com, or go to dentalpitchbrokerage.com and just fill out the information there. I'm on all the social channels outside of TikTok. I mean, my TikTok videos are like my little 5-year-old and 10-year-old's basketball games, but LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, etc. I'm very reachable on all those platforms. Conversations are free. I'm happy to help anyone, absolutely free of charge. The only way that we get paid as a brokerage firm is if we actually close your deal and you get money wired to your bank account. That's the only time that we're paid. I think it's super important though to understand that we're very extremely unique, just like my shirt, my leopard shirt you see today, or my Flintstone shirt.
If you're listening online, Elijah's wearing a slightly backwards hat, a couple necklaces, and like really large print leopard. It looks like, but it's large. It's not the small print.
Yeah, it's a Yabba Dabba Doo print. And my necklaces, even though you want them to be giant gold with a whole bunch of like diamonds in there, they're really like costume jewelry, and it's a headphone and a microphone. But that's just me being my authentic self. But what's my point? We do things differently. I've DJ'd in 9 countries, 25 states in the past 3 years for dental conferences. So I'm all around the world making people have the time of their life. And I wanted to bring in music into selling practices. So we basically have a dentist walk into a room and we give them their walk-on song. And it's like full room with audio visual, and it's a private room. And there's 10 buyers that are standing in the room clapping for you while you're walking on the stage, and you get interviewed from us. And so basically, we interview them and we get them up to 10 meetings in one day for buyers that want to buy their practice. It's very out of the box. It's extremely disruptive in our industry right now. And we love the process, and we love being different and unique. And the rest of the brokers are absolutely amazing. I have no negative things to say about them. We're just doing things different. We're shaking it up and doing things differently. We have 55 buyers in total. And so I am happy to be a resource no matter the size of your practice. I don't care if you have 40 or 50 practices, like some of the groups we work with, or you have one practice. If it's tiny or if it's big, I believe that at the end of the day, if I'm continually educating and pouring into our industry, I believe that good things will come back. And so conversations are free. I'm happy to have them.
Awesome, man. Well, great job. You are doing things differently. Elijah's everywhere all the time. So this is somebody you're going to be able to ask questions with. If you do work with them, the one thing I know about Elijah is he doesn't mind having a conversation with you. So this would be the first stop for me to talk to and say, okay, Elijah, tell me about how to sell my practice, whether it's now or in the future. It's something, if you own a practice, you're going to have to do it eventually. So this is great stuff, Elijah. Thank you for coming on. And I'm going to work on that, the boxing glove thing that you said at the beginning, and doing the showdown of both sides. I want to hear both sides, and I want to hear people's feedback from the other side and what you would say to that. So great job. I've learned a lot. I know our audience did as well. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Gary. Take care.